So today I have a review for you, and I also have my traditional Kekistani headgear. So I recently read through 1984 again, and I also watched the movie, which is something that I was really looking forward to because I really love John Hurt, and for his passing recently, I had a hole in my heart that I needed to fill. So I'm going to give you a quick review on the kind of pros and cons of, if you're new to the kind of 1984 thing, which one's better, pros and cons, stuff like that.
Now, number 1.
So the first thing I want to talk about is the characters. Winston and Julia were portrayed pretty well. I do think that Julia was a lot more angry in the book, but honestly I kind of like the fact that she was portrayed a bit more feminine, because the entire movie kind of had this like idea of like organic human love, which was represented by the nudity in the movie, and then the really rigid, dark, just really horrible kind of clockwork environment that was portrayed as very artificial and not like humans. So I think that making her a bit more feminine, because it was a visual medium in the movie and you need to change a couple things, was actually a pretty good choice. So I think that they really just wanted to hammer in how cold the world was around them by making the love story a lot more like loving. So that's that out of the way. Now O'Brien was a different thing altogether, because here's the thing. I think that the character portrayal by the actor who played O'Brien was actually really good for what he had to work with. And what I mean by that is, it wasn't perfect, but then again, my personal interpretation of O'Brien was always this person who was like not human. I mean, because he was kind of like, it was like he knew everything, and it was like he could do anything and be anywhere, so he was really the boogeyman of it, and in a way he represented the party a bit more than the Big Brother posters and stuff did, because he, like, Big Brother was just like a symbol for it, but he was actually like something that the characters intimately got familiar with as it went on, because, you know, he was the guy you could actually talk to, you could actually see him as a human being. So having him kind of not human in a way, because he was everywhere and he did everything and he knew everything, he was elevated to this kind of deity status that the state is elevated to in this environment, which is something that I really think matched in my own personal interpretation. So when you have a character that you can write as this non-human, like, clockwork god like character, and then you have a human actor is the only thing that you can do, and to portray him, it's gonna look not as good. So while I think the O'Brien character in the movie did leave something to be desired, it was better than I thought it would be. And I'm happy that it ended up the way it was, because I know that I'm not going to get exactly what I want out of that character. I do not mind that books are different from the movie that comes out, because I know that these are two different mediums and you have to use the mediums to the best of your ability, and that means changing things. Missing out a couple things or changing a couple things is not the same as inaccuracy in this context, because inaccuracy is when you get all of them feeling the atmosphere wrong and it just feels wrong and it ends up bad. But changing a couple things, even though it's not like just dot point for dot point that happens in the book, it's something that is its own thing. It presents the story in a different light, it even gives it a different ending, which I will be talking about, because 1984 the movie does have a slightly different ending, but at the end of the day it's a good thing. So then you have some background citizens, and the citizens interact with the main characters sometimes, but they're really kind of just there to fill the environment, and you can kind of notice that, but honestly it was done pretty well. There were certain elements which were kind of goofy, and in a way I appreciate them a little bit because it broke up some of the morbid bits of the film, like when Winston was in room 101 and stuff, and that scene was actually really amazing. I'm not even going to talk about that scene too much because I don't want to spoil it, even though you know what happens, just the emotion that everyone has in that scene was really well done. But I think that some of the goofy moments could have been done a little bit less goofy, because it did break that atmosphere for me a little bit when I was watching it. I was kind of like, what? Okay. But other than that, I think that you can get back into the movie pretty well. You'll notice what I mean when you watch it.
Now, number 1.
So the next thing that I want to talk about is any sort of juxtaposition and symbolism and all that sort of stuff. So there is a very clear line between the kind of freedom, human nature, embracing the truth angle, and the dystopian angle. And this is represented through color, brightness scale, and nudity. And I think that these things did very well. And as you notice, the nudity in itself, weirdly enough, is almost not sexual. Like, you know what I mean? If there's like nudity, let's say if a character's in war and they're fighting and they don't have any clothes on, that is not really sexual in a way. It's not really supposed to be portrayed as sexual because it's a war. They're trying to just show it as like a gritty war. And the nudity is used in a way that's like, this is kind of weird sort of way. and that's kind of what they were going for. So I actually think that worked really well, because even though the nudity was sexual to the characters themselves, we suddenly just see this out of nowhere when we were just introduced to this really dystopian nightmare. So it is kind of uncomfortable, because we feel almost scared for the characters. Like, this isn't okay. They're going to get caught, that sort of thing. And then we kind of realize that they don't really give a fuck because they're in the moment, and it feels a bit voyeuristic, and it does make you feel a bit uncomfortable, but I think that was the intent. It also kind of shows you the mindset of the person who's watching, because when I was watching it, I was watching it with my mom, and she had never heard of 1984 before. So she watched it. She completely ignored anything about society, any of the statements it was making, and the only thing that she's had to say when I asked her about what she thought about the movie's message was she was grumpy at the fact that the female character was naked for longer than the man character, so that was not fair and that was sexist. That is pretty much all that she had to say. So it really does show you, I guess, who's watching and what their priorities are, and it's an interesting way to kind of talk about these things, like, hey, you have a differing opinion, let's talk about it through the interpretation. So there is a big juxtaposition between the really saturated colors and just the overall brightness of the good area, and like that's usually just like his daydreams of going out into the field and all that sort of stuff. And then there's the really, really dark and rigid kind of area that he lives in reality. It kind of came across to me as a bit cliche sometimes. It was just like the amount of it, and I know that the entire thing was the fact that to really emphasize the difference between these two things, and it was kind of blurred to make it a dreamlike thing and the harshness of the reality and everything, but it seemed like a bit much. It just seemed like there were a bit too many filters caked onto it sometimes, and that just bothered me a bit. And it's really funny because I looked up some of the reviews for this when I was just looking at the IMDb stuff and everything, and it was really funny because, as I said before about the nudity, the whole point of the thing about the nudity was kind of to show you Puritans and the naturalness of the human body being taken away and turned into something ugly and all this sort of stuff, and the people who gave it negative reviews didn't like the nudity. So that was really funny because that just kind of proved the point of the film. I'm saying that yes, there is a time and a place for a particular type of media to express more adult themes. For example, I'm not going to say like, hey, let's put Freddy Krueger in a kid's cartoon, but at the same time, just because it's not in one thing doesn't mean that it can't be in something else. Just like with the fucking advertiser friendly thing that's going on right now, just because it's not family friendly doesn't mean that it's useless. And if anything, I think that a lot of the ads on YouTube videos would be better suited towards adults, because the adults are the one with the money.
And now, number 1.
So the ending, so this is the spoilers part, I guess. I mean, stuff that I've talked about before you kind of already know from people who've mentioned it, but I directly talk about the ending here, so just to let you know. The ending in the book, I'm not that good at summarizing it, but I'm just gonna do it for ease. So they basically took him to room 101 and they fucked up his brain. Again, really poor summary, but I'm just doing it this way. He ends up saying that he loves Big Brother, just, thinking about it, to show like the kind of force and the influence and the mind control. And it's to more demonstrate the point that there was a point made in the story about how they can't completely control you if they can't control your thoughts. So as soon as you have your own thoughts, even if you're in the most oppressive environment, you're still you. And then as soon as you control your thoughts, and there was the whole line about like, he's kind of talking to Julia and he's like, if they make me stop loving you and stuff like that, then that's when they control you. So the ending was like, they did control him. To me, Julia was still angry. So to me, I think that there was this kind of comment about how many times she's probably been through this, and maybe if she's lost other people the same way, and she still had that inside her. For that, it was kind of in a way hopeful, I guess, because it showed that Julia wasn't controlled, but even though Winston kind of was. So there was still kind of like some incompleteness to the ending, and that was something that I kind of liked. However, in the movie, they changed it very drastically. Julia's character is just straight up like, I'm lucky they caught me, I'm a thought criminal. And she was literally just like really preppy and happy. And there was a pretty big juxtaposition between the kind of somber quietness of a character and suddenly this kind of thing. I don't know how I feel about that. And there's another part as well of, instead of Winston kind of looking towards Big Brother, he actually looks towards the camera and says, I love you. So you don't know if you're like watching through a Big Brother camera this whole time, which is something that I kind of liked. So that part of the ending, I did kind of appreciate the change, but I'm really not sure about Julia. I really don't know if it just seemed a bit ham-fisted. It's like they couldn't make their mind up about how to subtly say, like, this person's not the same person anymore, they broke him or they broke her or whatever. They just had to straight up say it. And this is one of the first and major times that they did the tell don't show thing instead of show don't tell, which they were keeping it pretty good up until this point, and I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know if I like it. I don't think I do. And I do think that from this reason, I think that you should read the original first, because there's just so much meaning that I think was kind of lost with that ham-fisted ending.
Now, number 1.
So I'm just going to end it off with some closing notes. I think at the end of the day, apart from some of the weirder stuff that I kind of complained about, the adaptation was actually pretty good. I think that the atmosphere of it was mainly faithful enough, but I do think that if you actually want the entire original meaning, you should definitely read the book first, because the movie does kind of fuck it up a little bit. But then again, I have to ask myself whether that is just because of the medium being different from books, so it has to be different in some measure. But then you have stuff like the ending and the ham-fisted nature of it, and I don't know. And then part of me thinks that it was just dumbed down, which is one of the things that I guess I can talk about in another video, but it's more of a rant about a lot of the stuff happens with foreign cinema as well. Like, you have really good movies like Old Boy and other stuff in the foreign circuit, and they have to be dumbed down a lot for American audiences and for Western audiences, and I don't understand why. It's just like, hey, let's put Nicolas Cage in driving a car, let's put in a bunch of explosions, let's just put in like a stupid one-liners and ham-fisted dialogue, pointless stupid scenes that make no sense, and there has to be like a love interest somewhere, and all of the pain and the suffering of the originals that were portrayed so well are just gone. A lot of that stuff happens with horror, and again, that's another rant for another day, but I hope that this helped you deciding whether or not you wanted to watch the movie or not.